Hey team, welcome back to my channel. The source code for this video is available on my GitHub account. Make sure you go to PostgresQL short resources, and guess what you gotta do? You gotta scroll all the way down to the bottom and then look for XML with attributes to table.sql. Before we begin, notice that I'll be using select version. I'm using version 16. However, I have tested this code to work with 14, 15, and 16. Our table that we're going to be used is a temporary table, and all that really means is when I hit this X and close this window, this table goes away. That's all it means. Now this create table command, I have fields that are derived from my XML. So notice here I have tool ID, vehicle license plate. Well, you can see them up here, tool ID, vehicle license plate. And notice my data types, they just correspond with the data. So let's go ahead and create that table. And let's see if that, and notice that worked out fine. Now you can see I have declared a variable XML data. Its data type is XML, and I've assigned this XML to this variable. Now what we have to do is for each of these that actually has a value in it, I want to actually create some more variables. As you can see here, each of the variables assigns to an individual element in the XML. And for our state plate, notice that we're using attributes. So we'll be also storing those into our database. Remember, when we designed our database, all of those same attributes and elements are available. So notice I looked at the data type and I figured out they need to be a varchar, an integer, and a decimal. I think you get it. There is one more thing I need to point out that makes things kind of difficult. Remember when we created our table and we have device serial? Notice it's nullable. Now I made it nullable because notice on this record there is a device serial. But on the second record, notice there is no device serial. That's why I had to make that nullable. So we have to do some tricks downstairs to make that work correctly. Now when we run this, I'm going to add more XML to the party, and but this right here will just get us going. We are now ready to start looping over this XML, and let's begin. So notice that I say for record in select unnest XPath, and then here's my full path. Let me show you how I got that full path. Well, here's my root element, and then each child element begins with toll data. So it's toll data list / toll data. Now when this record is gone, imagine I take this away. Now look at that, I still have the same path, right? And if you come down here, toll data list, toll data. I think you get this. Now XPath. Now XPath returns an array. And unnest, array to rows. So we're only going to return one row here. And that one row value is going to come into record. Now we have to go define record. Let's do that. Notice I have declared record as of type XML. Now when I get to this raise notice, I'm going to print out the record. Now %, all that is a placeholder, and I'll be putting record into that placeholder. Let's run this program to see what happens. So you can clearly see we have two records. And you can see here we have the entire child node, one child node and the second child node. So our for loop works correctly. Now the first thing we want to do once we get into this for loop is initialize all of these variables. Now if you looked at my previous video, XML to table, I didn't do this step. And if you have an error in your XML, it's quite possible that your variables get in a headlock. And you don't want that. So what we want to do is on every loop, we want to initialize our variables. Now where did I get these variable names from? Well, you know that. I defined them all here. And guess what? They're the same names that we use up here in our table. So everything is, like coming together now. We are now ready to start parsing this XML. Now notice I'm going to use XPath, and I'm going to go with the child, toll data, toll ID, and then text. Now what does this mean? Well, you can see here that the output is 1 and 2. And if we go look at toll ID in the XML, you can clearly see that the value is 1 N2. So you can see here that text matches the node, the text node. So it's kind of very easy to see that I'm going to get the value and I'm going to assign that to tool ID. So here you can see that we have an array, and what does this right here mean? Well, this means right here that is a sub1. So arrays, remember XPath returns an array. Sub1 will be the actual tool ID. Then I'm going to cast that to a text and cast that to int. This is kind of like what we call double casting, and you have to do it this way on numeric data types. I do it on all of them just to be safe, and it always works. And you see that we now have our output. We've also added one additional field, skip this record. Now it's possible if I can't find this path, then this is going to return null. And if it returns null, I don't want to do an insert. So I want to skip this record, and notice I set it to true. Now on each loop, notice I initialize skip record to false. Let's go ahead and define that as well. Notice should skip record of type boolean. So I think you get it. Now on lines 77 to 82, we're going to be looking at our next part of the XML, toll data license plate. Now, when we're looking at vehicle license plate, notice over here we got ABC123. And then when I use this text, it's actually going to go get this value, and we're going to assign that to vehicle license plate. And you remember from the previous line, here we're going to pull out an array, get the first element of that array, and do a double typecast, text to varchar 20. And that's license plate. On lines 84 to 89, notice now that we're going to be using state plate. State plate is an attribute. Notice I have the @ symbol there. You can see this right here. State plate. You can clearly see that this is an attribute, and this is the value of this attribute. And you can see that when we use this raise notice, that I got out Florida and Florida, that is the value for state plate for both of our records here. And that is state plate. Let's continue. And now we're going to be processing the vehicle license plate expiration date. Notice the value is 2024-06. It uses the same things that we learned in our previous one. We're going to get array length of the first one to make sure that there's a value in there. If there's not, should skip record is going to be set to true, else I'm going to set the variable expiration date to this value right here. Notice I'll be using that as a varchar 20. Notice I'm going to speed this video up just a little bit. I'm going to get the total amount as a value, and then we're going to be looking at some attributes, currency type and payment rendered. And now the program is getting real fun. On line 126, remember I told you about device serial? On the top we said device serial nullable. Now if we just look at our XML, we have device serial in our first child. In our second child, there is no device serial. Now notice when I ran it, I got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see that number here. And then on the second record, I got empty. Now where did this right here come from? Skipping record. Well, that was the error message that I put inside of the if statement. Notice skipping record because missing device serial. Then I said, let's skip this record. Let's skip it. Even though it's nullable, I said, let's skip it. Now I shouldn't have to do that on this one because I did have it as nullable, but device serial. Now look what I'm doing here. Coalesce. Now what does that do? Guess what I have? I have a video on Coalesce that explains this inside out, upside down, and 3 ways to China. I recommend you go check that out, and it'll explain this like much better than I can do in this video. But pretty much what I want to do is I want to end up getting out either the value of this device or I want null. So if this right here returns null, then I try to go get one more, and it of course is null, so I return null to this. Now when we come down to the very bottom of the program and we print the data, I want to see nulls in in that column. I don't want to see spaces or double quotation marks. You know, I want the value to be null, absence of value. Okay, so now you understand about this should skip record. You understand why I have this if clause on each of the fields. We're building our value for the individual variables correctly. I initialized it. And now we're actually just going to insert, if we can, remember, by setting should skip record to true, I'm going to skip doing an insert statement. Let's now write the insert command. As you can see on line 134, we're saying if should skip record equals false. So remember, I initialized this to false at the top, and then if I get an error, I set it to true. So only if it's false do I actually want to do this insert. So I'm going to insert into that table we defined above. And then look what I do on device serial. I say case. So when it's empty, I say null. When it's null, I say null. Else, I put the device in there. Then the last field will be total amount. Now there's another way that you could write this if you don't like doing it this way. You could have said not should skip record. And then this will work there as well. So find a way that you like, keep with it. And at the very bottom, after we did all of our looping on our two records, notice that I'll select star from there, and notice that we just have our one row. We skipped one because it didn't have a device value, device serial. Now let me stick in some more XML and let's process this. So I've updated XML data. Now we have 10 rows, and we process the data. And then notice at the very bottom, I have a select statement, and here's the bottom. And notice that we have our nulls inside of device serial, but it looks like we're missing rows 2, 5, 6, and 10. They didn't get inserted, and you know why. Should skip record was set to true. And this is the end of the video, team. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please leave them below. And if this video was helpful, it could help other people if you leave a comment behind and tell them that this is something that you can use. It's a good video. I'd appreciate that. Well, until next time, take care.